Welcome. This is Dr. Owen Anderson, continuing in Hume's Dialogues, Part 9. Now, Philo had concluded Part 8 with a very definitive skepticism. No system can be shown to be true. And so that's going to get Demea to respond. And he says, but if there are so many difficulties in the a posteriori argument, that's the argument from experience, from design, hadn't we better stay with the simple and sublime a priori argument? The argument from reason, which cuts off all doubt and difficulty with a single blow by offering us an infallible knockdown proof. Furthermore, this argument lets us prove the infinity of God's attributes, that he is infinitely wise, infinitely good, infinitely powerful, and so on, which I'm afraid can never be established with certainty in any other manner. So that's right. From experience, we can only know God is more powerful than us. We wouldn't know the infinity of God. And that's what he's pointing out here. From experience, we don't know that. And we need an argument that would show that. And we also, from experience, don't have certainty. The unity of God's nature also is very hard, if not absolutely impossible, to infer merely from observing the works of nature. Whereas the a priori argument, and Cleanthes interrupts, you seem to reason, Demea, as if those advantages and conveniences in the abstract a priori arguments were full proofs. But in my opinion, we should first settle what argument with all these advantages you choose to insist on, and then we can try to decide what value to put on it. All right, so the argument that I would insist on, replied Demea, is the common one. Whatever exists must have a cause or reason for its existence. So that's not something you know from experience, because even though you experience that, you haven't experienced everything. There might be something you haven't experienced yet that doesn't have a cause or reason. So that's what it means in a priori. You're coming to experience with that assumption. And so we trace the causes. In working back from effects to causes, we either trace them back to infinity without any ultimate cause, or have recourse to some ultimate cause that necessarily exists. It's not itself caused. Now, supposition one is absurd, he says. You can't have an infinite chain going back into infinity. We'd be entitled to ask why this particular series of causes existed from eternity and not some other series, or no series at all. What was it then that made something exist rather than nothing and gave existence to one particular possibility, since in that system, you're only dealing with possible things, a list of possible things. None of them is necessary. So this is one way of arguing that you need to have a necessary being, not only a series of possible beings. We must adopt supposition 2, that there was an ultimate cause. And Cleanthes says, I know that Philo loves raising objections, but I shan't leave it to him to point out the weakness of your metaphysical reasoning to Demea. Your argument seems to me so obviously ill-grounded, and even if it succeeded to offer so little help to the cause of true piety and religion, that I shall myself venture to show that it is wrong. What is wrong with it? I start by remarking that there is an evident absurdity in claiming to demonstrate or to prove by any a priori arguments any matter of fact. Nothing is demonstrable unless its contrary implies a contradiction. Nothing that is distinctly conceivable implies a contradiction. Whatever we conceive as existent, we can also conceive as non-existent. So there is no being whose non-existence implies a contradiction. So there is no being whose existence is demonstrable. So what he's doing here is a very important attack on the a priori argument in saying that there is no necessary being. Anything that exists could not exist. I think what he has going on is a confusion between being and non-being. That non-being can't produce being. And therefore, there's always been a being. That doesn't tell us what being yet, but something is eternal. So you could show that. So he says, your claim that God is a necessary existent being And the friends of your line of argument try to explain this necessity of his existence by saying that if we knew his whole essence or nature, we would perceive it to be impossible for him not to exist. But obviously, this can never happen. While our faculties remain the same as they are now, it will always be impossible for us at any time to conceive, always be possible to conceive the non-existence of something we formerly conceived to exist. So is that true? Again, he's starting to go down the road of saying that we have limited human reasoning. In our current situation, we can think God, and then we can think not God. So conceiving seems to here to be like having a picture in your mind, and then you can make the picture go away. But when you start to cash that principle out into beliefs, propositions, and it turns into non-being produced being, and that's a contradiction, then it can't be true. So you know there must have been some being from eternity. So he says the words non-existence have no meaning at all. Well, they have the meaning of the opposite can't be true because it's a contradiction. He just hasn't observed the contradiction. Furthermore, if we do go along with this claimed explanation of necessary existence, why shouldn't the material universe be the necessarily existent thing? So that's another thing. Okay, let's say there is a necessary being. Why couldn't it be the universe itself? And he says, I've only found one argument that the material world is not necessary existent being, and this argument is derived from the contingency, both of matter and form. So the idea is, if you can conceive to be annihilated, and any form can be conceived to be altered, such annihilation or alteration, therefore, is not impossible. But you could also apply this then to God, he says. Perhaps you can at least imagine the non-existence of God. So again, you could picture that Michelangelo painting and then stop picturing it in your mind. Sure, but you can't conceive of being from non-being. So it's because of his limited view of what it means to conceive that he's able to make this case. Further objection, in tracing an eternal series of items, it seems absurd to ask for a general cause or first author of the entire series. How can something that exists from eternity have a cause, since the causal relation implies priority in time and a beginning of existence? Also, in such a chain or series of items, each part is caused by the part preceding it and causes the one that follows. So where is the difficulty? The whole doesn't need a cause at all. Just a series of events with no beginning, and you don't say, yes, but who started it? Well, that's the whole point of the series, is there was no one that started it. So your reasonings, Cleanthes, may well excuse me from raising any further difficulties, but I can't resist bringing up one further point. Arithmeticians have noted that every product of 9 has integers which add up to 9 or to some lesser product of 9. So 18, 1 and 8 equals 9. 27, 2 and 7 equals 9, etc. To a superficial observer, this seems like it was designed, made that way. But a skillful algebraist immediately concludes it to be the work of necessity. It's not made that way, it's just the necessity of how numbers work. So isn't it probable, I now ask, that the whole way the universe works out depends on something just like that we're not yet aware of? Anyway, continued Philo, dropping all these abstractions and staying with more familiar topics, I venture to remark that the a priori argument has seldom been found very convincing, except to those people who already accept its assumptions. Other people, even ones who have good sense and strong inclinations in favor of religion, always feel that there's something wrong with such arguments, as the a priori argument for the existence of God, even though they may not be able to explain distinctly what the direct defect is. So the end here, we've gone through a number of parts on the argument from design. Both Philo and Cleanthes team up against Demea on the argument, the a priori argument, sometimes called the ontological argument, and dismiss it. And the final reason is it's not convincing. No one's ever converted to a religion by talking about the necessary being. So the next part, Demea is going to respond to that, and we immediately get put into the problem of evil. People aren't brought into religion by philosophical arguments. They're brought into religion by the problem of evil.